For class 4, I'd like to point out, is this really going to get the people who buy vacation houses to stop? I mean, you already need a lot of money to acquire second residence, so I don't think this being a little bit more expensive will really suit the activities. Most of the people who buy a vacation house already have the money, so if they're really determined to get a vacation home, they would just do it either way.
Thank you so much.
Firstly, we believe that this will, in fact, try to address the problem of the speculation in cases in which people have multiple real estate properties. The tax will actually be higher, and what this will mean is even if they try to buy when their prices are low, the profit that they will gain upon selling when prices are high will be as great, and hence this will reduce inflation and allow people who actually use the houses to buy when the price is low. Then about the problem with houses being empty, we don't only introduce constant taxation from houses that are empty, but we also address the problem by limiting some of the other actions the person can actually take upon having an empty houses. I would like to continue by addressing the problem of how are we gonna encourage construction. So what we will do for this is reducing the amount of bureaucracy needed for actually proceeding with the development permit, as well as facilitating funds for companies to actually invest in them. On the other hand, on the part of whatever we will be challenging the free market by introducing some limitations, we will be considering that as we will not be challenging the free market, although we will be introducing some limitations in order to prevent people from abusing and increasing in excess price, as we will limit the range of the rent, but we will not limit the. So, what I mean by this is, we will let you establish a rent, but we will limit the amount of in which you can make it during tourist peak seasons in order to prevent the companies from actually abusing and letting long-term renters stay in their houses even during the seasons in which supposedly the rent will be higher. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
From the Committee of House, and I would like to thank all for your questions. The first thing that I would like to answer is about tourism. You say that tourism is a really important part of our economy, and how are we going to manipulate housing without affecting to tourism? We'd like to say that tourism is a really good, important part of our economies, but also I think important is our citizens. We would like to ensure a home for our citizens, and we would like to decrease short-term rentals. So we would like to not to stop tourism, but to redistribute it to ensure that everyone has a dynamic house to live in. So maybe in our classes there is we're not going to stop tourism, but we're going to reorganization so that it doesn't stop our citizens, take our citizens' places. On the second part about speculative taxes, we're not gonna avoid what we want to say is people that has many houses and they are empty, so that these houses don't remain empty, so that people who need them can use them. This is not gonna stop houses from getting occupied, and it's not gonna also make really this is not gonna stop people from living in their houses, because we're not gonna we're not gonna make anything to the people who are gonna live in the houses. Sorry, we're just gonna stop people from getting many houses digitalize submissions to reduce paperwork and processing. Hi, my name is Tanya. I'm here with delegates of the other community. Today, we face a very complex issue which has very significant consequences, which is drug trafficking in the EU. This project not only impacts public health and safety, but it also affects every country's institutional and economic stability. Drug trafficking in the EU is no longer peaceful. Consumption and accessibility of illicit substances have increased significantly, resulting in violence, conflict, and loss of life. In 2023, 419 tons of cocaine were seized in Europe, and over 7,500 deaths were linked to drug use, showing the insufficiency of current measures. Accessibility has affected through online platforms and anonymous markets, making regulation more difficult. The lack of a harmonized legal framework for digital platforms further complicates the situation. Structural vulnerabilities and EU borders are exploited by criminal networks within European ports, which have become a strategic entry points. 1,826 tons of illicit substances were seized at or in transit to EU seaport between 2019 and 2024. International cooperation remains fragmented. Differences in national legislation and inconsistent enforcement allow organized criminal groups to adapt quickly, shifting routes and methods to exploit gaps. Maintaining the current protocol is not viable. We need a comprehensive and modern European-wide approach. Enforcement alone is insufficient. Public health initiatives, rehabilitation services, awareness campaigns, and targeted support for vulnerable populations are equally necessary. By adopting this resolution, we strengthen coordination, improve enforcement, and reduce the impact of illicit substances across the EU. This problem affects all member states and demands a united response. We strongly urge you to vote in favor. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for your post. We all agree that drugs is a really concerning problem in our society right now. But my question is, how do you ensure that a stronger, more armed police force will not determine trouble?
My name is Selección. Thank you for recognizing me. There are places in Spain like
I will begin with a question. How can we expect citizens to make informed economic decisions if they were never given the tools to understand the system clearly? In the European Union, financial literacy is an essential life skill. It enables people to manage their budgets, protect themselves from scams and misinformation, and avoid over-indebtedness. Yet, despite being one of the world's most advanced economic unions, only the 18% of EU citizens demonstrate a high level of financial literacy. The gap affects everyday lives across Europe. It is, however, clear that financial literacy is unequally distributed within the EU. There are significant differences between member states, between men and women, and among disadvantaged and minority groups. As a result, millions of citizens lack financial resilience, struggle to understand inflation or public policies, and are excluded from meaningful participation in both economic and environmental debates. This is where ECON steps in. Our aim is not just to raise financial literacy levels, but to even them out across all member states, ensuring that access to financial knowledge does not depend on gender, background, or social results. The European Parliament seeks to narrow the gender gap finance, empower minority and vulnerable communities, and address the structural inequalities that lead to financial dependency and economic violence. Moreover, this approach recognizes that financial literacy is not only a technical issue, but also a psychological and cultural one. Taboos and discussing money, widespread misconceptions, and as financial trauma discourage open debate and learning. Therefore, overcoming these barriers is just as important as teaching formulas or definitions. Finally, this resolution acknowledges that recommendations are not enough. It calls for effective incentives and contributing mechanisms to ensure that EU standards and strategies on financial literacy are not simply suggested, but to be truly implemented. Because financial literacy is not just about money, it's about independence, confidence, resilience, and equal opportunity. Thank you.
Honorable jury, chair, and delegates, I'm Nerea from the CULT committee. While we fully agree that financial literacy is important, we stand firmly against this resolution. First, this proposal oversteps the competences of the European Union. Education policy is and should remain a national competence. By pushing standardized approaches and stronger EU involvement, this resolution risks undermining subsidiarity, financial systems, taxation structures, labor markets, and even just cultural attitudes towards money differ significantly between member states. A one-size-fits-all framework simply cannot address these diverse realities effectively. Second of all, this resolution assumes that low financial literacy is primarily a structural failure, when in reality it's often just a matter of personal responsibility and individual choice. Removing survey options like I don't know does not increase knowledge, it simply distorts it. Forcing implementation through stronger incentive risks, prioritizing compliance over quantity. And third of all, we must question the effectiveness of embedding financial education into already overloaded school systems. Teachers are not financial advisors, and schools cannot really compensate for systemic economic inequalities. And moreover, encouraging teenage learning and tourism promotes precarious work rather than genuine education. In conclusion, whether the goal is recommendable, the approach is misguided. We must represent national sovereignty, avoid bureaucracy overload, and focus on structural economic stability, rather than just imposing more standardized economical mandates at a EU level. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Embajadores, and we would like to ask you how do you justify the opportunity cost of creating a whole new EU-level institution rather than reforming existing ones on a national level, and whether you will be able to adequately measure the behavioral change in the long term.
Hello everyone, I'm Nerea, and I would like to start by asking you a question. Have any of you ever wanted to join a cult? Well, I hope not. Luckily, this is called as in Culture and Education Committee, not a national cult. But working in the EU's cultural sector sometimes feels just as demanding as being in one of these, spending all of your time and soul into creative projects and still not being able to pay rent. That's the heart of the problem. The culture sector in Europe is full of passion, talent, and creativity, and at the same time, it's one of the most unequal and unstable sectors, making it in need of a deep reinvigoration. The COVID-19 pandemic didn't create this crisis, it just simply ripped off the advantage. Turnover losses exceeded 20%, 10 million jobs disappeared, and the people who give Europe its identity, its stories, its art, they were left with almost an entire unprotection. Culture accounts for Europe's 3.5 GDP and employs 8.7 million people in this country. This is not a silly hobby, this is an industry, and it will keep crumbling before our eyes if we don't do anything to stop that. So what does this mean for people living there every day? 68% of culture workers hold second or even third jobs just to survive, not to live comfortably a luxurious lifestyle, to survive. And 77% So when the next crisis comes, because it will come, they will fall again. Meanwhile, 88% of the support measures are short-term emergency fixes, with only 15% of them in the long-term intervention. We're not building a resilient sector, we're just gluing together the little pieces of the broken system. And it doesn't end there. Women in the arts are 10% more likely to work part-time, and only 1/5 of all of the cultural awards are directed by women. Our resolution addresses all of these problems and even more through different measures. We call for an EU artist status, a harmonized definition that finally gives culture workers access to social security and unemployment benefits between projects, regardless whether they're freelance, hybrid, or non-standard. We are also pushing for sustainable funding, no emergency injections, but targeted EU grants that help small and medium enterprises and also self-employed workers to collaborate, build stability, and have a permanent full-time job. Because the answer to poverty is not charity, it's a strong structure that will not crumble over time. We also demand fairness through gender-balanced hiring subsidies, anonymous harassment reporting systems, and pay gap transparency for every organization receiving public funds. At the end of the day, Europe's cultural sector does not need sympathy, it needs systems. It needs protection, investment that matches value, yes, economically, and also humanly. Because culture is not decoration, it's a shared memory, the shared identity, and the shared future of this continent. The question is not whether Europe can afford to reinvigorate the cultural sector. The question is whether Europe can afford not to do that.
Cultural artists from house calls. In your first, second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh, eighth, and 12th event clauses, you mentioned the necessity for various types of funding. How can you ensure that this necessity doesn't lead to a self-independent ecosystem that collapses upon the arrival of the next economic crisis?
Just let me say something. Everyone, when you're walking up the stage, do you want to get applauded or not? Yes. Or else it's awkward for the people who are walking. So please, when you're going up to the stage, applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey, for your proposal. We all agree that rural depopulation is a serious issue, but good intentions are not enough, and this resolution feels more incremental than transformative. Many of the measures proposed, reducing VAT, improving bus routes, and offering tax incentives might provide a short-term relief. However, they don't fundamentally change what people with rural areas in perspective. Young people are not moving away because they are exploring cultural identities. They are moving because they see limited career progression, limited innovation, and limited long-term stability. The proposals obviously heavily on subsidies, incentives, and additional funding through different European funds. Yet, it does not explain how rural economies will become self-sustaining without a strong competitive economic base. Infrastructure improvements risk being underused and public spending risk becoming inefficient. Furthermore, much of the responsibility is passed to institutions to conduct more research, provide more visibility, and distribute more funds. But rural communities do not permanently lack visibility, they lack structural economy competitiveness. Reports and awareness campaigns will not close as well. There is also an underlying assumption that encouraging people to stay is not. For retention without opportunity is not development. Rural areas they must become places for innovation, technology, and diverse industries can grow at a scale, not only agriculture and tourism. In summary, while this resolution addresses real concerns, it does not go far enough in proposing systemic and economic reform. For these reasons, we believe it is insufficient to truly reverse the rural exodus. Thank you.
You were referring to the Austrian data that is not really clarified. So what mechanism ensure that there's no data collected for counter-radicalization, for voices, is not explosive, for passive realism? Thank you very much. You can refer to the house.
My question is, if your stronger preventive measures involve increasing monitoring or targeted intervention, how will you ensure that you do not increase social exclusion and the